One of the things that this young woman said, she was talking about God's law. It seemed like in her mind, it's like, what's the big deal? Why all these rules about sex and these different things that people get caught up on? How important is it for us? I mean, I was just reminded how important it is for us to explain the goodness of God behind the law. I think a lot of times people hear these commandments, they just think it's arbitrary. But why is it that the moral commands in Scripture, in particular related to things like sexuality, are actually ways in which we're loving our neighbors? Because everybody wants to love their neighbor. You call people to love their neighbor, to love, and I think most people today, even millennials, will say, yeah, I like that. I like the idea of being a loving person, of loving my neighbor. We just haven't tied that together with that actually has bearing on sexuality and the way we think about men and women in relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get that in when you start to look at the laws of our nation to some degree. Some of those laws are there for the functioning of a good civil community. The laws against exploitation, they're not oppressive. They're actually there to keep you from oppressing each other. And in the same way, you start to look at God's law. When Paul in First Thessalonians 4, he talks about the command towards sexual purity. One of the things he says is interesting is that God is an avenger in these things for the one who sins against his brother and sister. He sees that some of those that sexual sins, we sin against ourselves and our bodies, he says in 1 Corinthians 6, but also we sin against our neighbors oftentimes. It is such a source. I mean, we think of the Me Too scandals recently. Sexual sin and sexuality is a place of deep wounding when it's misused, and you can deeply exploit each other. And when you look at God's laws as good boundaries put in place by a good father on how to properly experience sexual joy and unity between a man and woman in marriage, you start to realize that God is trying to help you.
Yeah.
And eventually he made a fireplace for the fire. He didn't just, here's the fire and now let's burn the house down.
And I think people start to see that after they get burned a bit. And I've had a student, a former student who, you could tell some of him was walking away from the faith for a while due to these desires, due to wanting to not be bound by some of these structures. One of the things that caused him to reconsider was getting burned in a really crazy relationship that went wrong. He started to see, maybe there are reasons. Maybe there are reasons God said, don't walk in this way because there's a cliff down that road, and I don't want you to hurt yourself. And I think that's actually an apologetic. Christians need to start getting used to pointing at the nature of reality, and when reality kind of bites back, because our culture, places that our culture have led people down a wrong path. And this isn't us about being fearful or condemning or kind of a Jeremiah, but just saying, look, that hasn't worked, right? We've been trying that for a generation now. It's not working. It's hurting people. It's damaging people. There is a reason God has offered this better way. And so,
and doesn't that get us back again to the whole question of if Jesus is the risen Lord and he points us to the Father and all things were made by him and through him and for him, then obviously whatever he says about how it's all put together and how it all functions properly is actually the way it is. And it's time for us to start living with the grain instead of against it.